Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
And I'm Professor Meg.
And today we're at Chip Theory headquarters diving into first impressions of the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era. Now, before we dive into this, as usual, timestamps down below, check out any of those sections, all that. But first and foremost, disclaimer, we are at Chip Theory's headquarters. We just got given a guided walkthrough of the game. We just sat there and played through the entire first quest. But take that all into account as you watch this video. We got, flown in and all that stuff over there. So just take that into account as we go through this. But with that said, we're going to go into a bit of just a general overview of what the gameplay cycle is like, then our first impressions of the game, and at the end as well, kind of a bit of a comparison as well to the Too Many Bones system, because it has some small similarities there, and so what this game will or won't feel like as someone coming into it as a Too Many Bones player. But with that said, let's start this off with what the game does. Do you want to jump into it? Should I?
Go for it.
So,
I think you're much better explaining.
The Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era is going to be a bit of an adventure system, which you go through a variety. You go through a system of where you're going to be counting the days as you go through a sequence of quests. I believe it's generally 3 quests you're going to be going through, and you're going to go from one quest to the next, and at any point you could fail and lose, or you can just go through that system. Along the way, you're going to be upgrading your characters, upgrading your skills. You can have various attributes that are fighting for each other as you vie for how you balance these attributes. A lot of things is going to be hard to go into as we go through this. But the general idea is you're going to start the game by picking your character. You're going to be picking various specialties, various, I can't remember all the names, different things, but you'll have your sideboard of your specific row of abilities. Then you're going to have different levels of, combat and defense and various training and all that. Different levels of training you'll be going through in the game that you can level up. And then within those, you have all these battle dice that you'll be able to buy into. So there's like multiple tiers of how this works in combination with the race or the Argonian or the Imperial or whatever various factor. They'll give you a species bonus or a thing to that modifies how you are. All these things are kind of combining to the way you're going to start off your character and the way you can modify and build your character across the course of these quests. From there, you dive into a quest, and again, it's a bit of a choose-your-own adventure as far as how you start off, what you choose, and you're going to be going through a sequence where you have such a number of days to accomplish your goals in the game, and in that process, you're going to be wandering around the map, going to various towns, engaging with wandering enemies on the board, or just having various encounters from this deck of encounter cards that will give you something that you have to go through. Various weather-based effects that happen, diving into these various delves into the dungeon, different things that happen along the way as you go through these journeys step by step, both gaining experience along the way to level up your characters and further build out these specific things you're good at, as well as your reset, your cooldown, the dice you have, all these things. And then from there, eventually making your way to the end of the scenario, this quest you're on, the specific goal that you're trying to achieve, at which point you'll either fail and start again or whatnot, or alternatively, you finish your quest, you go on to the next one until you get to the end of the third quest, have the final ultimate showdown, and that is basically how this is going to play out.
And you can fail the first quest.
You can fail the first quest. I believe so.
Yes, and then you go into despair.
Despair. It's horrible. It's bad. That's basically the highlights. Anything specific I'm missing?
Yeah, I would say for my character and the different things I was able to do, you also have different towns that you go to where you can buy different things. There are regular items and relic items, and I think they were all very useful and different. So that's just another way you can build out your character.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's tons of items, pets, gear, potions, different things you have along the way that you gather at these towns. In each town, you're playing on these maps, and each of these maps has different locations of them, and each location is their own unique thing. You're going to have a book relevant to the specific area you're in, and that book's going to be, you're going to open it up and have different types of towns, different pools of items that they have, different specific abilities to those towns, quests they have, different ways you can train your various attributes and what proficiencies there are available to you in those towns. Everything is completely unique. You're living in a world that has specific features or attributes or aspects to that universe as you go through it. So that's the kind of high-level overview. I would say a big focus on combat, because this can be a question people want to have, is combat is going to be on a hex-based system as you wander around the board, and there's 2 core kinds of combat. One is going to be you're on a general battle mat, which has a variety of hexes to it. You'll see some of that in the B-roll or whatnot as you go through this, but you're going to have a general hex map as you wander around and try to deal with whatever specific setup to that encounter you have. The other big type of encounter you have is going to be these dungeon delves. Dungeon delves, you're trying to go into this dungeon to get various things, and as you go through them, you go level by level, still modifying your turn, being mindful of the turns as they go by, because they will slowly have a bit of a pressure that's primarily on you, not so much on the enemies, that will eventually start clogging you down with fatigue that you won't be able to get rid of and taking true damage every single round. But along the way, you're trying to go through these dungeons, either dealing with the enemies or just running past them, trying to stay ahead of them so you can accomplish your goals as you basically sneak past them, engage with them, try not to get damaged too much by them. That's basically the other main type of encounter, these giant dungeons full of creatures and enemies as you try to accomplish your goals in there. And traps, also traps, lots of traps. But that's basically, the traps.
Traps are fun.
That's basically a high-level idea of what's going on here. To that end, as far as first impressions, you want to start us off?
Sure. I had a really fun time. I really enjoyed building out the characters. I think that that's probably where this game shines. Again, I really liked going to my items, but there's also the different skill tracks that you can pay into, and they're all just very customizable, which I really love as someone who's not a fan of, not that I'm not a fan of Elder Scrolls, I've just never played it, but so someone who's new to this world, it was explained to me that you can really have any type of race become any type of thing, you can have a mage that is also a thief and things like that. So I really liked that regardless of who we chose to start as, we could really build into anything. So whatever your play style is, you're really able to lean into how you feel comfortable playing.
Yeah, there's a lot of character customization going on here as far as how you build out your things. An absolute ton. And to be very clear, what we experienced is still only in the demo phase, which means we have a lot of things that there are available potentially in the full core game or expansions or all of that stuff that we haven't even had a chance to dive into. And even with what limited stuff we had, there's just a ton of ways to build out your characters. A big defining aspect of it is as you gain these various attributes, you have to potentially weigh them up against each other. Your character could have 8 possible attributes, but 4 of them are always going to be clashing against the other 4. So your first 4 attributes feel like it's open, it's a fair game. Get what you want, do what you want with it, it's all fine. But then once you start layering out other attributes, they're now suddenly eating into each other. As you level up one, you'll hit a point where you have to choose which one is more dominant to you, which one you're going to have a few points in versus the other. This is a system that if you've played Gentes will be familiar to you as far as how you balance wanting everything, but inherently, even if you have enough, economy to get everything, you're just limited by the sheer way these attributes are clashing against each other.
And another thing that I really enjoyed taking a video game concept and trying to board gamify it was their cooldown system. So there's a cooldown system where all of the dice that you use in your turn, they go into this row, and they you can only cool down up to where your marker is. So you can kind of clog up all your dice and you slowly get them back, but I feel like it was really puzzly and thinky at a certain point where I decided to make an attack just to have it reset and recycle that I could have all the dice back. So I think that worked really, really well, and it was a great way to take a video game concept and put it in a board game.
Yeah, and speaking of the puzzly aspect, a big part of the game as well is you have these kind of different stances as far as how you can, what type of dice you're using at any given point, whether defensive, offensive, whether you're doing ranged attacks, melee attacks, or magic abilities, some more so than attacks. But all these things that you're doing as you go through it, they go into that puzzly effect as changing your stance. Changing your stance will have a bit of a fatigue aspect to it that you have to manage, and that fatigue goes into the cooldown. But the benefit of it is you have the opportunity to make decisions as far as I'm going to go ahead and attack the enemy, and then I'm going to change stances, take a drop of fatigue, and then immediately turn around and heal my allies. And so again, it's a bit of a puzzly nature. The more you're changing stances, the more you will be taking on fatigue that you have to manage within your cooldown. But it gives you the ability to have turns that are as simple as moving and just engaging with a treasure chest and picking the treasure chest locks, all that, versus turns that can be really complex but also really rewarding at the same time. As far as the encounter system, as far as the encounters you're having in the game, a big part of what you're going to be doing is having different types of encounters. Like I mentioned already, there'll be the encounters that are just generically fighting enemies. There'll be these dungeon dives, delves, and then there'll be just different encounters that are kind of based on the text on the cards, which if you're familiar with events effectively. That events will give you these various choices as far as what type of experience you'll gain, how many days will pass, or the various the little mini games or just things that will happen to your characters. You have to take extra fatigue, you have to take extra damage, you have to discard an item. But these are all these different things that are happening to you that keep the pace of the game moving as the days tick by in order to get to that end game. And this gives you a degree of freedom in the map that you're engaging with as far as what you're trying to do. Do you want to have another event? Do you want to have another encounter? Do you want to, do you want to try to level up your characters and gain more experience? Do you want to walk into town so you can, go ahead and start using whatever abilities the town have or trade-ins or get more items or things like that, leveling up your character's skills and attributes? And that's all of that lends itself to the system of progression of building up your characters and building things up while trying to figure out how to make your way to the end game where you have to be a little more powerful in order to actually have a more viable chance of winning as you go through it. And all that nicely paces itself so that you're doing different types of activities as you go through that thing. We only played one quest, but that one quest I think is probably an hour and a half, somewhere in that range as far as what it was. Maybe an hour and a half, but even that, I think Pacing will potentially vary, but somewhere an hour and a half. And that gives you a good degree of mixing up the experiences that are happening along the way. You have different types of events so that it doesn't feel like you're going combat to combat to combat to combat. Rather, you have the ability to choose exactly what's happening, not exactly what's happening, but have some degree of agency over what's going on, whether it's a 5-minute card that's going to progress you by a day, or whether it's a full dungeon delve that might take you 25 minutes to go through, but will also progress you by a day. So the progression of time is a little different, but the different type of events nicely break up the flow so that it doesn't feel too what's the word for it? Grindy at any given point as you go through it. Past that, as far as combat is taking place on a hexagonal grid, which gives you the opportunity to move around different ways and take advantage of different attributes that you have. Whether your attributes focus more on your stamina, that'll affect how much you can move, or your range in terms of melee effects or whatnot, ranged attacks, versus whether you're leaning on your magic, which will affect how many dice you can roll there, as well as the range of your magic attacks. All these things give you different puzzles to go through where the grid does matter. This is where it might be, well, I'll get to the Too Many Bones comparisons shortly. For me, overall first impressions of the game come down to the fact that I really liked the degree of character complexity and building in the game. I liked a lot in terms of just how much variety there seems to be in, again, even a limited experience that we had so far. I think there's a ton of ways to try different builds, especially with combining multiple characters, and how you're going to try to focus different builds, different stats, different abilities. And as you get to the later quests, a lot of it's going to be more about refining those skills as opposed to just getting more. So it starts off with more, and then it shifts towards refining. So you have the ultimate combination of the various dice-based abilities, the various attributes you're playing into, and the traits the skills you're leveling up as you go through it. And I think there's just a ton of solid character creation going on. As far as the encounters themselves, I think it just gives you a good mix of things that give you tactical experience, tactical depth, a degree of choose your own adventure, a degree of flavorful events going on in the background.
And there are two different ways to encounter enemies, I guess. There are the event cards where we were going into delves and stuff like that, but there's actually enemies that are wandering around the map as well that you can bump into and fight, or they end up moving toward you as well to fight. I really enjoyed that as well, that there's kind of the known enemy that you can see on the map and they're moving around, but then there's also the surprise enemy of an event card happening.
Yeah. And then, of course, the final encounter as well, which, that could be a bit of a nightmare to go into.
And I really enjoyed the town system as well. There's different towns that you can go to and do different things, and that's where you can go shopping and train up your skills, and you can get quests and go to the guilds and things like that. And I think that again, gave me a video game feel, like an outpost that you're going somewhere and it's somewhere safe, like nothing bad is going to happen in the town and you can do all these things and then go out adventuring.
Yeah, and the sequence of the way the gameplay phases off across multiple quests as well gives you that aspect where you're given enough of an experience that you are incentivized to focus well on what you level up. This is not a game that you're playing for 60 minutes. It's a game you're playing for possibly, let's say 2.5 to 4.5 hours, depending on how long these things go and depending on the player count and all these factors. But those are going to give you an incentive to level up while also making it containable. This is not a campaign that you have to play across, the next 4 months. This is a campaign that you can finish in 2 or 3 game nights, and possibly 1 if you're really devoted to it and really giving it that full, 4 or 5 hour session. So,
and this is just getting into the details, but with the 3 different quests that you do the first one, and then you can either stay on that map but work for a different guild, or go to a different map and work for the same guild you've been working with. So I also like the branching paths, that it does have that replayability of, I decided to stay on this one map and keep helping different people, and instead, the next time you can decide to go to a different map, things like that. I think that was really clever how they give you the choices of what to do, and then it opens up so many options for replayability.
Yeah, I agree. Overall, I liked it. I think it gives you it gives you a very diverse exploration, adventure, questing, semi-campaign driven experience that gives you a lot of reasons to continue to dive back in, whether it's the branching quests you're going on, whether it's exploring the map you're on in different ways, or whether it's the way you build different characters, or even just the host of event cards that will make every experience a different experience, or even the dungeon delves, or all these things, meaning even within the system in which you encounter the exact same things, it's still going to play out differently every single time, just through the sheer ways of building characters, of the variety of how a dungeon delve will play out, or just the way you choose individual quests. There's a ton of variety to the experience you go through. As far as how it compares to Too Many Bones, or as far as ways that this might be interesting to know if you are coming at it as someone who played Too Many Bones, there's a lot of high-level overlap within the systems to the point that the systems will feel familiar to each other. But they also feel very different, and in ways that are not necessarily better or worse, but different depending on what you're looking for in different aspects. To begin with, I think this is more accessible than Too Many Bones. If you are someone who's played Too Many Bones and gone through rules then, and the every character being a intense puzzle to figure out, this one gives you a lot of the similarity of the feeling of Too Many Bones in Adventure, and a lot of core overlap. Will come to some of the ways that they're similar, but it also does so in a way that is much easier to dive into. It feels like a lot of the systems have been refined and cleaned up to a point that it's just easier to dive into. Things are just more streamlined and less of a lot going on as far as the different things going on. Even things like the quest cards. If you've played through Too Many Bones, one of the similarities here is the idea of you have these encounters, and the quest cards are going to be like those story-driven points are going to be similar to the encounters you're having, in the sense that it's just a deck of cards that gives you something different as far as the puzzle you're playing through. But I think Too Many Bones is even more complicated, even just the way you read through a card and have some degree of complex interaction. And this gives you the same system, but just a bit more streamlined. There's a little bit less of this okay, I have to read and do what exactly. It's the same system, but a bit cleaner. Combat's going to be an interesting one as well. I know a lot of Too Many Bones players in general, a lot of people are totally fine with the battle grid system they have in Too Many Bones. A lot want something that feels more like a map. And this will give you that feeling more like a map. Especially in a regular encounter, for sure, it'll give you that, because you have a really real hex-based system with a little more room to maneuver, to wander around, to engage with the puzzle that is set up by the cards. But then also, especially in the dungeon dives, as you really build out a full dungeon that you're going through and exploring, and again, whether you run past enemies or whether you engage with the enemies, it is not uncommon at all that you'll be finishing a dungeon delve by running away. You'll deal with enemies that are there, but then you'll get your safe distance, you'll run away, and you'll leave the map because there's a large map being built out on the grid there. And so people who are looking for that element of Too Many Bones, we have that kind of system at play, but with something that feels more like a map and a little less like an abstract puzzle, this will 100% give that to you. Any comparisons you want to bring?
So I thought it was interesting. I was going to bring this up till now on the fly, but I know you wanted to compare it to Too Many Bones. I feel, being here at Chip Theory, they took a lot of strong parts of a lot of their games and kind of put it all together. That I do see like the Too Many Bones comparison, especially with the dice system and the abilities that you get. And I think that with that, it's also more accessible because you choose which attribute you're going to start paying into. So you don't start with an entire sheet. You start going one by one, gaining sheets as you take different proficiencies, abilities, whichever they are. But it also makes me feel very reminiscent of Cloudspire, moving around the map and having a much bigger map and having the puzzle of how to move around people. And I didn't say this when we were playing, but it also reminded me of Hoplomachus with the days and how you have like that time track that you're trying to move across like a larger map while fighting in smaller maps. So I felt a lot of the different games throughout this.
As far as the characters, is an interesting one as well, which is a pro and a con, depending how you're looking at it, because it goes into that a little bit more accessible. But the characters are a little different in the sense that in Too Many Bones, every single character is its own sheet, effectively, its own mini puzzle and its own giant way of exploring the character. Versus over here, it's less about any character having a singular giant puzzle that they are, and rather giving you an infrastructure that is much bigger, but you have to explore that infrastructure in your own way. It becomes self-contained as you choose out how to build your character. And so you can have a little less of like the uniqueness of this character standing out, but a lot more of a larger puzzle and ecosystem, which works well because that is familiar to how, well, the Elder Scrolls, you would build something out. Is a lot more familiar to that system and works well within that system. So it's a little easier to get into and a little bit broader in what it's doing overall, but you're the one who self-contains as opposed to the characters becoming self-contained on their own. Past that, I think that the progression of it felt generally similar. I agree with you as well. It felt almost a little bit more Hoplomachus in the progression, but both of them have that similar aspect of just the way you're proceeding across something that is not a giant epic campaign, but is also not necessarily a single, 1 to 2 hour long experience. Giving you that system.
And something clever that again I didn't tell you yet. Compared to Hoplomachus, I love the map in Hoplomachus. It's beautiful, but you are just kind of moving around a map. The map for this is the same grid. It's the hexes. Did you realize that you're moving around? So I thought that was also very cool that even on the overworld map, it looks like the in-game maps, which again, like it gives you that video game feel.
Yeah, no, it really does.
It's very clever.
It really does a solid job overall. But I guess so. Yeah, that's where we are with this one. For my overall impressions from it, as a huge fan of Too Many Bones, of Cloudspire, of Hoplomachus, I think in that order. Burn Cycle too. Clouds with Too Many Bones, Cloudspire, Burn Cycle, Hoplomachus. As you go through those game systems, this is going to feel familiar to people who like chip theory game systems. And if you like most of their systems, I think you will absolutely like this. I don't think that's even a question. If you don't like any of their systems, then I think it depends on why. If you found some of them too complicated, then this might be accessible. I would say accessibility-wise, this is probably more akin to Hoplomachus as far as being one of the easier ones to dive into. Not easy, but easier, giving you enough complexity to be rewarding, but not so much overhead to be a homework puzzle just to figure it out. So as far as accessibility, I think it's more the Hoplomachus level, but it still feels exactly like a chip theory games game with all of the things you'll like about their systems. If you haven't liked any of their systems, I don't know if this is going to change your mind. It has enough similarities to the hybrid of things going on that unless you're here for the IP and the IP alone, then I don't think this will change your mind if you haven't liked those systems. And if you're someone who's new to chip theory games, if you're coming in as a Elder Scrolls fan and this is your first foray into a game like this, I think you'll find it very compelling. I don't know what your experience will be like with other board games with this or whatever it is. I think you will find it compelling though. The things you like about the Elder Scrolls video game, those things at a high level are going to be here, just abstracted into a board game instead of a video game, which makes it an entirely different puzzle. And I just have no idea whether you'll like it, but I certainly hope you do. Yeah, but that is basically it. That is our first impressions of the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of a Second Era from Chip Theory Games. You can find this over on GameFound. There'll be a link down below. And everything we've seen us go through, whether in this video or any B-roll, whatever it is, this is a prototype, all rules, component stuff, subject to change. But yeah, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg, and thank you to Chip Theory Games for letting us hang out here and play this game and do all of this, because this was really special.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Have a good one.
Bye.